You can laugh at me tonight, but tomorrow you will choke on it.
My name is Jake Harrison. I'm 43 years old, and for more than a decade and a half, I've been bound to Rebecca, my wife of 16 years. She's elegant, driven, and ambitious. Someone who long ago carved her place inside the gleaming walls of Sterling and Associates, a design firm that exists in a rarefied world of luxury and prestige. I, on the other hand, live in a very different rhythm of life. I run a workshop called Craftsman's Edge, a space that smells of cedar and walnut, where my days are measured not by boardroom agendas, but by the weight of chisels and the slow patience of sandpaper. For years, our marriage found its balance in the contrast of those worlds. Rebecca, the rising star surrounded by glass towers, and me, the steady anchor shaping wood with my hands. I never minded being her shadow in public. In fact, I embraced it. At gala dinners, networking nights, or office cocktail parties, I was perfectly comfortable being the supportive husband, the one who offered a polite smile, made the right gestures, and allowed her brilliance to shine unchallenged. That dynamic seemed safe, unshakable, or at least I convinced myself it was, until one particular evening dismantled that illusion in a way I'll never forget. The cracks had begun to form months earlier, when Rebecca's new superior stormed into her professional world. Victoria Cross, an executive, whose very name carried a kind of tremor through design circles, was not just another boss. She was a figure people either revered or dreaded, often both. Her reputation was legendary. Her influence sharp enough to elevate a career overnight or grind it into irrelevance with little more than a raised eyebrow. At home, Rebecca spoke of her with a mixture of awe and anxiety, recounting Victoria's cutting remarks and impossible standards as though describing a force of nature. Most nights, Rebecca returned from the office visibly worn down, yet her conversations fixated almost exclusively on Victoria, on her brilliance, her cunning, her terrifying authority. She described her as though she were some untouchable monarch with flawless posture and manicured hands that dictated everyone's fate. I would listen quietly, pencils scratching across the sketch pad where I drafted cabinet joints or shelving systems. I nodded, offered encouragement, even as I noticed something sharper lurking beneath her words. It had been years since Rebecca called my work remarkable, years since her eyes lit up at something I had crafted. Now, her praise, her hunger, her energy all belonged to Victoria, as though proving herself in that ruthless orbit mattered more than anything we had built together. The tension reached its peak with Sterling's annual gala, staged that year at the Meridian Ballroom downtown. The moment Rebecca told me where it was being held, I pictured it. Marble floors polished so thoroughly they could mirror your every step, chandeliers spilling golden light over crowds dressed in perfection. It was the sort of place where appearances were currency, and subtle cruelty passed as sophistication. On the night of the event, Rebecca emerged in a deep navy gown that clung to her frame with effortless elegance. She looked breathtaking, though the beauty was clouded by the tension that radiated from her in the car ride over. She sat rigid, staring out the passenger side window, her jaw tight, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against her clutch. It was the posture of a soldier on the eve of battle. I wore the best I had, my only suit worth mentioning, pressed just for the occasion, though I'd worn it perhaps twice in my life. I braced myself for the role I knew I was expected to play, the dutiful partner who lingered quietly at her side, invisible but reliable. The Meridian Ballroom met every expectation and then some. It was a cathedral of extravagance, a space humming with ambition and wealth. Crystal chandeliers draped the room in a flattering haze while a string quartet coaxed delicate melodies from their instruments near the entrance. Groups of colleagues clustered together, their conversations laced with talk of projects, clients, and deals so far removed from my world of dovetail joints and varnish that I might as well have been listening to a foreign language. As soon as we stepped inside, Rebecca was swallowed up by her peers. They descended on her with air kisses and rehearsed enthusiasm, their words polished like gems meant to be displayed. Compliments spilled effortlessly. "You look radiant, Becca. Victoria hasn't stopped talking about your March presentation." Everyone's impressed by your concepts. But when their eyes briefly shifted toward me, the warmth vanished. To them, I was little more than a prop, a necessary accessory to complete the portrait of Rebecca's polished success. They did not ask what I did for a living, nor did they bother with the simplest of courtesies. I was a placeholder, a decorative figure beside her, destined to fade into the background as the evening advanced. That's when I saw her. Victoria Cross herself, standing near the bar as though it were her throne. She was exactly as Rebecca had painted her, tall, with silver hair arranged in deliberate precision, makeup applied with flawless artistry, and a posture so commanding it pulled every eye in the room toward her. The people surrounding her leaned in unconsciously, as though seeking warmth from a fire. Then her gaze shifted, settling on Rebecca. A slow smile unfurled across her face. It was not kind, nor was it warm. It was the measured smile of a hunter recognizing prey, an expression that silently demanded, "Prove yourself worthy of my attention." Rebecca inhaled sharply but forced her shoulders back. With a strained smile, she led me toward our assigned table, her movements sharp and deliberate, as though conducting a parade. The table itself was a study in elegance, linen draped in perfect symmetry, glassware rimmed in gold, name cards positioned with almost surgical precision. I bent to find mine, expecting the neat flourish of Jake Harrison, or perhaps simply guessed of Rebecca Harrison. But my eyes landed on something else, and for a long, paralyzing second, I couldn't believe what I was reading. In looping golden script, the card bore two mocking words: Village Idiot. The laughter started before I could process it. A ripple of chuckles spread around me, soft at first, then swelling louder, sharper, until it cut across my skin like glass. My chest tightened, my face burned, the humiliation surging hot through me. And Rebecca, my Rebecca, did nothing. She let out a nervous little laugh, her eyes darting toward Victoria as though seeking permission to find it funny too. Victoria, glass raised, smirked in my direction, savoring the cruelty with the calm amusement of a cat toying with a wounded mouse. One of Rebecca's colleagues, a man with a meticulously styled haircut and a vest that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, snapped a picture with his phone. "Oh man," he said with a grin. "This one's going in the group chat, classic Victoria." Another woman leaned closer to her companion, trying in vain to suppress her giggles. "This is so her," she whispered. "Always making a statement, always cutting straight to the core." My fists clenched the linen napkin in my lap until I thought it might rip in two. Fury surged through me, urging me to flip the table, to shatter their perfect crystal glasses, to expose the ugliness of their carefully polished world. But something deeper, steadier, refused to give them that satisfaction. I had spent my adult life building things that endured, cabinets, shelves, crafted pieces that fit together seamlessly and stood the test of decades. I would not let this room of sharks dismantle me with one cruel stunt. So I drew a long, measured breath, and then did the most unexpected thing I could. I calmly pulled out my chair, sat down, folded my hands neatly on the table, and smiled. Not the brittle, artificial smile I had worn all evening, but a genuine one. A smile that said, "I see all of you clearly, and you cannot break me." The laughter faltered. For the first time, Victoria's confident smirk flickered. Rebecca's eyes widened in startled disbelief. Even the man with the phone lowered it, realizing the explosion he'd anticipated wasn't coming. "So," I said evenly, my voice carrying just enough weight to cut through the uneasy silence, "what's for dinner tonight? Other than me, obviously." The chuckles that followed were different this time, uneasy, uncomfortable, stripped of their triumph. For a brief moment, the upper hand belonged to me. Victoria recovered quickly, clearing her throat, forcing her tone back into its usual cool condescension. "We're creatives here, Jake," she purred. "We live for irony, for turning expectations upside down. It's harmless fun. Nothing more than professionals enjoying themselves." Rebecca leaned close, whispering frantically in my ear, her words trembling with desperation. "Please, babe, it's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously. That's just how Victoria is. Everyone knows she doesn't mean anything by it." Her eyes told a story her lips refused to voice. They shifted restlessly from one face to another, scanning the table, reading every flicker of expression, every smirk and sideways glance. There was no hint of defense in them, no apology for the cruelty that had just played out in front of me. What they revealed instead was calculation. She wasn't worried about my humiliation. She was worried about her own reputation. She was making sure I didn't unravel her carefully polished image, didn't shatter the fragile approval she had worked years to secure from people whose opinions clearly outweighed the dignity of her own husband. I held her gaze long enough to let the silence stretch into something heavy and uncomfortable. Then I asked, my voice steady, my words deliberate, "Don't do what, Rebecca? Don't embarrass you. Or don't embarrass them." For a brief second, her eyes clung to mine, then slid away. That single glance was all the answer I needed. In that instant, I understood where her loyalty lay, and it wasn't with me. Victoria took the reins of the moment with effortless authority. "No need to linger on trifles," she said smoothly, her tone wrapped in superiority. "A touch of harmless fun, that's all. We're professionals here, after all." With a graceful motion, she lifted her fork and began eating, every movement carefully staged to signal that the matter was closed. And as though choreographed, the rest of the table fell back into step, cutlery tapping porcelain, shallow conversations restarting. It was a performance, and they were all seasoned actors. But beneath the practiced facade, the tension still hummed. It vibrated in the air like a live wire, prickling against my skin. And there in front of me sat the name card, staring up from the white linen like an accusation. Village Idiot. 2 words written in gold script, meant as wit, framed as irony, but to me they were something entirely different. They were a scar branded across the evening, a declaration of how these people truly saw me, a line drawn that revealed their values as clearly as if they had spoken them aloud. By the time we were halfway through the main course, some elaborate creation plated like art, probably costing more than many people earn in a single day, I had already made up my mind. Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. The sound of the chair scraping across the marble floor was sharp and jarring, slicing through the comfortable hum of conversation. It silenced them instantly. Rebecca reacted at once, her hand darting out, clutching at my sleeve. Her whisper was urgent, her voice trembling on the edge of panic. "Jake, please sit down." But her eyes told me the truth once again. They weren't filled with concern for me. They were calculating, desperate, spinning through the ways she might control the fallout, rehearsing explanations to contain the disruption I might cause. She wasn't worried about my pride. She was worried about her own exposure. I eased my arm from her grip, her fingers slipping from my sleeve as though water sliding away. "I'm just stepping out for some air," I said, calm and measured, each word chosen carefully. I smoothed my jacket with one hand, turned from the table, and walked away without hesitation. Behind me, I felt the hush settle over our section like a sudden drop in temperature. Conversation stuttered. Eyes followed me, but I didn't look back. I walked straight toward the bar where I'd spotted Richard Sterling earlier, the president of Sterling and Associates himself. He was deep in conversation with a regional partner, but I'd worked with him enough over the years to know he'd at least give me a moment of his time. Richard had always been respectful during my installations at their offices, praising my craftsmanship and mentioning how much money my custom work had saved them. Each step toward him felt weighted with purpose, carrying every slight and patronizing laugh I'd absorbed over the years. Behind me, I could hear Rebecca's voice calling faintly, but I didn't look back. This conversation was between me and the people who thought they could label me village idiot while still expecting the best of my professional work. Richard turned as I approached, his face lighting up with genuine recognition. "Jake Harrison," he said warmly, extending his hand like a man who remembered an important business relationship. "Craftsman's Edge, of course. Your custom installations saved us a fortune on the Grace property renovation last quarter. Absolutely brilliant work, as always." His praise was practiced but sincere, the kind of appreciation that came naturally to successful businessmen who recognized quality when they saw it. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel the usual gratitude for his acknowledgement. I wasn't here as a grateful vendor seeking approval. I shook his hand firmly, feeling the strength in his grip, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with the photo I'd taken at the table, my name card with its elegant gold script spelling out Village Idiot against the white linen tablecloth. Richard's expression shifted from polite confusion to genuine shock as he processed what he was seeing. His smile faded completely, replaced by a deep frown that aged his face 10 years in seconds. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, his voice uncertain. "What exactly am I looking at here?" I kept my voice low but steady, each word chosen with precision. "Ask your VP and her team why they thought it would be funny to put this at my place setting tonight. Ask them why they laughed when I saw it, why they took pictures to share with their colleagues." He stared at the photo, his jaw working silently as the implications sank in. I could see the gears turning in his head, the weight of responsibility shifting as he realized this wasn't just some harmless office prank gone wrong. This was a potential scandal, a public embarrassment that could damage the company's carefully maintained reputation. "Mr. Harrison," he began, his voice now edged with concern and something that might have been fear. "I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. Let's sit down somewhere quiet where we can talk this through properly." I shook my head firmly. "I'm not here to negotiate or talk through anything, Richard. I came to this event to support my wife and celebrate her achievements with her colleagues. Instead, I was publicly humiliated at her table by her team and, by extension, by your company." I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough that only he could hear, but firm enough that he'd never forget what I was about to say. "Effective immediately, Craftsman's Edge is cutting all ties with Sterling and Associates. Our 6-year partnership ends tonight." His eyes widened, color draining from his face under the soft glow of the bar lights. "Wait, Jake, let's not be hasty here. Your craftsmanship, your reputation, your team, we've always had such a strong working relationship." "My team will be fine," I said, my tone final and non-negotiable. "We have other contracts with clients who respect both our work and our dignity. Now we'll have more time to focus on people who understand the value of what we bring to their projects." Richard opened his mouth to respond, probably with some corporate damage control speech, but I stepped back before he could start. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my spine was straight and my voice was steady. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years, the freedom that comes with finally choosing yourself over the comfortable shadows you've been hiding in. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Victoria across the room. Her laughter had frozen on her lips, her wine glass suspended halfway to her mouth, her eyes locked on me with a mixture of confusion and genuine annoyance. She clearly hadn't expected the evening's entertainment to fight back. Rebecca stood beside Victoria, pale and trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she was witnessing. For the first time in months, she was seeing her husband not as a convenient accessory, but as a man with his own power, his own choices, his own lines that couldn't be crossed. I didn't stop to explain myself to either of them. I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, each step carrying me away from the people who'd tried to define me, away from the +1 who'd stayed silent for far too long. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean, a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of that dining room. I took a deep breath, watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars, and felt something in me settle that had been rattling loose for years. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could hear Richard's sharp voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Victoria, my office, first thing Monday morning, now." I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove home, already thinking about the future, about the clients who respected me, the projects waiting for my attention, the life I was going to build on my own terms. Rebecca came home hours later. I heard her keys in the door, the familiar click of her heels on the hardwood floors, the small sigh she always made when crossing the threshold. Usually a sound of relief, but tonight it carried something heavier. She found me in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of water, the television off, waiting in the kind of silence that demands honest conversation. Her makeup was smudged, her perfect hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes were red from crying. She set her purse down carefully and turned to face me, arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Why would you embarrass me like that?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "You don't understand how that world works, Jake. It was just Victoria's sense of humor. Everyone knows she doesn't mean anything personal by these things." I stared at this woman I'd loved for 16 years. The woman who'd once laughed at my jokes and stayed up late helping me sketch ideas for the business we'd built from nothing. Tonight, though, I saw something different in her eyes. A glimmer of resentment. A thin film of panic at what my actions might cost her. "That world," I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "The world where your boss thinks it's amusing to publicly label your husband as village idiot. The world where you sit there and let them laugh at me like I'm not even a human being worth basic respect." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. She shifted uncomfortably, her arms tightening across her chest like armor. "It was just a harmless joke," she said, her voice rising defensively. "You know Victoria. She's always had that sharp wit, that way of pushing boundaries. It's how she tests people, how she sees if they belong in her world." "Her world," I said quietly. "Not our world. Her world, where I'm the entertainment and you're the audience member who laughs along to keep your seat." Rebecca flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair. You know how hard I've worked to get where I am. Every day in that office is a test with Victoria. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and you're out. I've sacrificed everything to prove I belong there. You laughed, Rebecca, I said, my voice soft but unforgiving. When they humiliated me, when they turned me into a punchline, you laughed with them. Then you told me not to make it about me, as if my dignity was somehow less important than your career advancement. She broke then, her careful composure crumbling like a house of cards. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling in her lap. You don't know what it's like, she whispered. Every single day I have to prove myself in that office. Victoria watches everything. How you dress, how you speak, who you associate with, how you handle pressure. I was terrified that if I defended you, if I stood up to her, she'd mark me as weak, as someone who couldn't handle the culture. So instead you marked me as disposable, I said gently. You chose your fear of her over your love for me. The truth of it hung in the air between us, undeniable and devastating. Rebecca covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 2 days later, packages started arriving at our house. Express deliveries with corporate logos, thick envelopes marked personal and confidential. I opened them methodically, laying the contents out on our kitchen table like evidence in a case. The first was a formal letter from Richard Sterling himself, written on company letterhead with legal precision. Dear Mr. Harrison, I am deeply sorry for the incident that occurred at our gala. What happened was completely unacceptable and does not represent the values Sterling and Associates strives to uphold. We have initiated a full internal investigation to ensure such behavior is never repeated. Please accept our sincere apologies and consider maintaining our business relationship. The second envelope contained a handwritten note on personal stationery, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. Jake, I'm Sierra from Rebecca's team. I was at the table that night and I'm horrified by what happened. I recorded Victoria afterward, bragging about the prank and laughing about how you'd react. I sent the recording to Richard this morning. People like you deserve better. I hope this helps. The final document was a single sheet of corporate letterhead with Victoria Cross's typed resignation, effective immediately. No apology, no explanation, just cold legal language, and a signature that looked like it had been applied under duress. I read through everything twice, then set the papers aside and looked out the window at my workshop in the backyard. My phone had been buzzing constantly for 2 days. Competitors calling with job offers, industry contacts reaching out with condolences, and partnership proposals. Apparently, walking away with dignity had done more for my professional reputation than 6 years of quiet, excellent service ever had. Rebecca was upstairs, having been placed on indefinite administrative leave while the company conducted their investigation. Her career, the one she'd sacrificed our marriage to protect, was damaged anyway. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. That night, we sat across from each other at the same kitchen table where we had once mapped out our future. Rebecca looked different without her work mask, softer, almost younger, with none of the polish and pretense she wore every day. She had no makeup on, just a plain sweater and jeans, and for a moment I saw the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. I don't know who I am without that job, she said, her voice faint. I spent so long trying to prove I fit in Victoria's world that I lost sight of what really mattered to me. I listened without interrupting, recognizing that this might be the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in months. I forgot, she continued, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I forgot how much strength it takes to stay kind, to choose dignity over advancement. You've always carried things I never even noticed. You let me have the spotlight while you quietly held everything together, and I repaid that by letting them treat you like you were nothing. You didn't just let them, I said gently but firmly. You joined them. You laughed when they laughed, and then you asked me not to embarrass you by defending myself. She nodded, accepting the weight of what she'd done. I was scared that if I stood up to Victoria, she'd destroy my career, take away everything I'd worked for. But she destroyed it anyway, didn't she? Because I chose fear over love, ambition over integrity. We talked until late that night, not about reconciliation or fixing our marriage, but about truth. About how we'd gotten to this point, about the small compromises that had added up to something enormous, about the person she'd become and the person I'd allowed myself to become in response. I didn't make any promises that night about our future together. The hurt was still too raw, the trust too broken, but for the first time in years, I felt truly seen by my wife, not as an accessory or a plus one, but as a man with his own worth, his own dignity, his own power to choose. Months later, my work is booming in ways I never thought possible. The same firms that once treated me only as Rebecca's husband now fight to hire me. I'm no longer anyone's tag-along. I'm a builder who knows his worth and won't settle for less than the respect it demands. Rebecca and I are in therapy, trying bit by bit to piece back what slipped away. Some days go well, some don't. At times, the trust feels as thin as glass, but we've both changed. She's learning to chase success on her own terms, and I've learned my value doesn't depend on what others think. The truth I found that night at the gala had nothing to do with payback or drama. It was about the quiet strength in walking away, in refusing to take treatment that cuts you down. I never shouted, never caused a stir, never dropped to their level. I just stood firm, drew my line, and left with my pride whole. At times, the boldest move you can make is to choose yourself, even when it costs all you thought mattered. At times, leaving speaks louder than any fight. And at times, the biggest win is not letting others' cruelty set your worth. That night, they tried to paint me as a fool. Instead, I walked out as the man who remembered he was worth more than their sneers.